Hi, this presentation is called CAFOs are a Human Health Hazard, presented by Geneva Thompson. So CAFO overview. CAFO stands for Concentrated Animal Farming Operation. You may also hear them called factory farms. It's big corporate factory farming operations that buy out family farms, they take over the land and take over all of the industry in the area. Overpopulation of animals is always an issue in these places. The animals are kept in small, confined spaces. There are immediate dangers to human health as well with these CAFO operations. The immediate dangers to human health include runoff pollution in air, water, and soil, the spread of zoonotic disease, antibiotic-resistant superbugs, environmental racism, decrease in quality of life for neighboring communities, and terrible working conditions for those who are employed. And we can see in this graph that the green line is the number of hog farms in the state of Michigan between 1985 and 2025, and the blue line is the number of hogs being sold during the same timeline in the same area. So we see the number of farms actually decreasing and the number of hogs greatly increasing. So we're having less farms, but more animals being produced, so they're being kept in less facilities and in more crowded spaces. The first issue of runoff pollution. Fertilizers and pesticides can run off of the fields and off of the farms and pollute the water sources. The AMA Journal of Ethics states animal waste lagoons allow nitrogen, phosphorus, ammonia, methane, hydrogen sulfide, heavy metals, antibiotics, and microorganisms to contaminate the surface groundwater, the air, and the soil. CAFO waste management is underregulated, and when we have underregulated waste management, it also leads to the runoff of hormones, antibiotics, other chemicals, fecal bacteria as well. All of this also goes into the water, soil, and air. The EPA considers CAFOs to be a major source for water pollution. And communities that live in close proximity to these places definitely have a higher rate of deadly diseases. And we can see in this graphic, also for the state of Michigan, it's showing the CAFO waste versus human waste in Michigan for a year. It's by pounds of waste per million. And we can see that CAFOs are very wasteful compared to humans. The second issue is zoonotic disease. Why should we care about that? Some interesting information. 75% of emerging infectious diseases are zoonotic. Lack of biodiversity leads to zoonotic disease, and lack of biodiversity is what's happening in these factory farms because we're having a lot of the same type of animal in a small area with similar genetic makeup, and that allows pathogen spillover and genetic similarity to allow the transmissions and mutations of these diseases. And there's a risk of transmission between humans, domesticated, and wild animals. So where we've seen this recently in the news is with the bird flu. It started with birds, but it's also killed wild tigers that have been kept in zoos. It has killed domestic cats. It has contaminated raw food that domestic cats have been fed, and they've died that way. And it's also contaminated humans, so we can see it going interspecies there. And this is a perfect example of a zoonotic disease. So superbugs are another issue. A superbug is a bacteria that has become resistant to antibiotics. So what that means is animals that are being treated with antibiotics at the factory farm are not responding to them. So when they get ill, the antibiotics aren't helping them whatsoever. So that meat is diseased. And two superbugs that they deal with a lot in factory farms are E. coli and MRSA. They've been mutating into these superbugs. One study reported that more than 90% of E. coli in pigs raised on conventional farms are resistant to tetracycline, which is an antibiotic that's widely used, whereas whopping 71% of E. coli in pigs raised on farms without antibiotics are also resistant, and that's because the resistance genes spread so well. So that is alarming because it's saying that both pigs treated with antibiotics and pigs not treated by antibiotics are becoming resistant and have this resistant gene. So it's just showing how it's transmitting and mutating itself. MRSA is also a bacterial infection, could be deadly, and it says that livestock-related MRSA infections are prevalent in the U.S. So environmental racism is more of a social justice issue, but it's a very real issue that impacts human beings every day. These people who live next to the factory farms actually live poor quality of life for a number of reasons. So it's injustice and discrimination. African American, Latino, and Native American communities were 1.5 times more likely to live near a CAFO than white communities. And research in Mississippi revealed that hog operations were disproportionately located in areas with high percentage of low-income African American residents. That's actually the issue that made me think about this complex problem. Was I watched a documentary on African American communities in Mississippi who live next to these farms, and so many of them were dying of cancers and all kinds of stuff. So it really intrigued my interest. They deal with housing discrimination. They're unable to afford houses in safer areas. They lack political power to create real change in their communities. And workers are primarily immigrants and people of color. Many are paid below minimum wage, and they lack access to health care when they do need it. And their job makes them sick on top of regular sicknesses. And then there's high exposure to toxins and a high incidence of injury in these places. So factory farms are also a big nuisance to neighbors. CAFOs should not be protected by right to farm laws. And what a right to farm laws are, they are laws that were put in place for families to be able to farm food on their own land without their neighbors complaining, so they could provide for themselves. And these big factory farms should not be protected under these. People who live next to these places complain of odors and headaches, noise complaints, and also they have property values decline. They also don't enjoy their land at all anymore because it's miserable to be sitting outside and be next to this noisy, smelly factory. And this picture here is a picture of a turkey factory farm operation. And this is actually what they call free range. So if you ever get any meat or eggs that say free range or cage free, it doesn't mean that they're out on a grassy farm somewhere in the sun doing what they want. It means that they're in a building, but they're all allowed to walk on the floor out of a cage instead of being kept multiple birds to one small cage where the walls and everything would be lined with cages. So this is a free range turkey farm. Harmful work environment is a very serious issue. There are high rates of injury, illness, and mortality in these places. The workers deal with low wages, little to no health care benefits, poor job security, and also some issues with them and some quotes that I thought were beneficial to see from the AMA Journal of Ethics. It says, because farm workers are exempt from both the Fair Labor Standards Act and the National Labor Relations Act, they regularly face some systematic human rights violations with few protections and little legal recourse, which means they get away with a lot. And then they also say in the United States, meat processing workers are more than 3 times as likely as the average worker to suffer serious injuries while working, including an average of 2 accidental amputations per week. And that is a lot of amputations. I wouldn't expect any on my job. So that's terrible that these workers have to deal with that type of an area, and then they don't have the health care and such to deal with it. And if they sue their work, we can see from the previous quote that they may not get any help or may not win anything in court because of that. Last, an article called Hidden Costs of Factory Farms states workers in factory farms often feel trapped by economic necessity, few job alternatives in rural areas, and fears of deportation because a lot of them are immigrants. Additionally, many workers face language barriers, and they lack access to education and job training programs that could help them transition to other industries. And so effectively, this traps them in the cycle of exploitation and health risks, which is true. They can't get out of this cycle. It kind of reminds me of the coal mines in West Virginia back in the day, where they were trapped in work. So there are some possible solutions being tossed around. The consolidation of agriculture has resulted in global operations owning a majority of commercial farms. So what we need to do is take the power back as individuals, as families, as communities and neighborhoods, and we need to think about sustainable farming. Sustainable farming could be anything from you growing your own dinner and raising your own chickens for your own eggs, growing your own fruits and vegetables, your own meats, whatever it is. It could also be creating community farms. I see this a lot now where there are gardens, community gardens where people come and work throughout the summer. And then they can just come and take what they need for the day. And all of these are ideas like if we could get back to basics, you grow your own food, you trade with your neighbor, you go to farm stands. All of that is going to let these big factory farms know that we're not interested in what they're selling. But in America, we've become very dependent on meat. So we need to think of alternative ways to either decrease the meat that we're eating or grow our own meat or support your local farmers who do this type of thing. So there are still some local farmers left, and you can drive by and see signs that say like freezer beef for sale or anything. It's so much better to buy from these places than to buy from your local grocery store or your big box grocery store that gets their meat from factory farms. And that is all. Thank you very much.